It's not the howling wind that keeps me awake at night. Out here in the Wyoming wilderness, where the whisper of nature usually wraps around you like a comforting blanket, a sense of unease gnaws at the edges of my mind. They said I'd find peace in solitude, up here in this fire lookout tower. They never mentioned the undefined dread that creeps in once the sun slips below the jagged silhouette of the mountains. I've worked in exclusive isolation before. The high-altitude solitude has always been a strange comfort, a chance to breathe and let life slow to the gentle pace of the forest. Until now, every creak of the wooden tower against the wind brings a fresh jolt of tension. There's something lurking outside the realm of what the eyes can see and the ears can hear, something that seems to whisper in the space between the gusts of wind and rustling leaves. The tower isn't much, a narrow climb to a modest room perched on stilts. Inside, it's sparsely furnished. A chair, a table, a creaking cot that serves as my resting place, and the radio. My link to the world beyond, an echo of human voices crackling back when there is a rare transmission to share. But even the radio's occasional sputter feels strained these days, as though the voices recognize they're being listened to by something. Hungry. The first time I noticed it, I was on the evening rotation with my binoculars, tracing the outline of the distant horizon where pale green pines stretch skyward. A deer stood still at the tree line, its body taut and alert, as if sensing an unseen predator. For a full minute, it didn't move. Just before it vanished back into the shadows, its eyes seemed to pierce right through me, as though it knew something I did not. The air felt heavy then, cloying, like I was breathing in water rather than wind. Twilight is alluring in the mountains, but the color drains too quickly. It leaves the forest a palette of gray where shapes blend into long shadows. It's in these shadows the unease thrives, growing angrily potent when the last of daylight's golden hue flickers and fades. I suppose that's when I first heard it, that soft, distant murmur crawling in like fog between my thoughts. Faint at first, the sound danced along the periphery of hearing, a mocking imitation of human chatter that slipped away whenever I tried to concentrate on it. Figured it was just the remnants of a forgotten old broadcast tangled in the white noise of the night. Only, the noise was never on the radio. It snaked through the cold night air, curling in tendrils of whispering nothingness until sleep fled from me entirely. The watch runs 24 hours, and night drenches the landscape in an oppressive solitude. That's when the sensation of being watched transforms from fleeting to tangible. I feel it, a beam of attention that bears down harder than my binoculars ever could. Some nights I imagine that the eyes upon me belong to something vast, sprawling across the dark, wide forest floor like a living shadow. Other times, it's as if a single pinpoint gaze is fixated on me from somewhere nearby, just outside the reach of my flashlight's flickering beam. Each step across the tower floor, each turn to peer out into the spreading ink of night, is tinted with a brittle apprehension. My pulse synchronizes with the slow, inevitable rhythm of my footsteps. Yet, there's nowhere to escape up here. This watchtower was meant as a refuge, standing strong against the threat of wildfire, not whatever lingering chill seeks entrance now. I gave the idea of leaving more than a fleeting thought, too. Of course I did. That first week of whispers teased just enough fear to rattle old instincts. They don't give you a vehicle. You need to hike into town, across 20 miles of trackless forest terrains, to get restocked and refueled. We're not allowed personal electronics, just the radio and the emergency line. Even so, that excuse seems thin compared to the idea that something waits with unyielding patience for me to make a wrong move. It's an irrational fear, childish almost, the kind that sends shivers down the neck when you're alone and a door stands ajar, darkness spilling over its edges. But truths often lurk in such deeply personal fears. I hold the radio close most nights, and maybe it's useless reassurance, but it feels like an anchor when the world's lost all safe harbors. The feeling of being alone, truly alone, echoes off the cabin's walls more profoundly than the usual straightforward longing for human contact. It's a more primal solitude, the sort people scrawled across cave walls about, a sense that your voice is snuffed out amid the dark, scoring a thickness into the silence. There, in that moment just before my vigilance fades into unwanted sleep, when sounds transform into a listless soundtrack of dreams, the world outside threatens to collide with the world inside. In that overlapping space, I fear not just the watchtower's collapse. To physical threats, but the breach of something unknown. A presence more the essence of shadow than form. That silent moment drags longer and deeper, winding its way into dreams where it's perpetually dark, and there's no moon to soften the broken terrain. It should feel freeing, the disconnect from all the clamoring, busy noise of regular life below. My days blur within these confines, now taut with apprehension. My hands taut white on the wood when I stand over the railing at night, as if something might creep up over the edge. Or worse, sneak up the stairs without a sound. It feels foolish to write these fears down, foolish to give voice to imaginings that might just unravel further if shared. Yet ignoring them seems even worse. Each scratch of pen on paper, each log note filled becomes less about fire prevention and more about capturing a still image of sanity before it extinguishes entirely. There's a darkness here, not in absence of light, but in the suffocating presence of something bending reality's fabric, stretching it tight to the brink of tearing. Entire days slip away under the weight of that knowledge, of an unseen entity intertwining deeply with the shadows. And for some reason, even I dread to find what's hiding in the seams. I think it was around the second week that the air started changing. The view from the tower, once a panorama of wild beauty, began to shift beneath endless twilight. The sun dipped quicker behind the jagged peaks, casting long, grasping shadows through the forest. I tried to dismiss it as the usual course of nature, the way the seasons roll over themselves without pause. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The wind carried a different smell, one that clawed at the back of my throat, a mix of mossy dampness and something metallic, like rust. Every evening, the whispers returned with the darkness. I'd sit at the desk, pretending to read an old, dog-eared book while my heart clattered in my chest like an old engine struggling to start. On the worst nights, I'd fight the urge to lock myself away in the small supply closet, just for the illusion of safety it offered. The muttering seemed to swell just beyond the glass, like a breath against my cheek that was too close, too warm. I began avoiding the late-night patrols, an unofficial duty most lookouts take to ensure the safety of the forest. But my own safety felt compromised. The thought of stepping outside the tower, leaving my perch, made my insides churn. So I stayed in the tower long after dusk, convinced that any movement might provoke whatever lurked outside. My hands ached from gripping the edges of the desk, my body as tense as a bowstring. Then one night, as the moon cleaved its way through the clouds, I saw her. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, where the trees broke into the clearing. She was nothing more than a silhouette at first, backlit by the pale light, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her shape. I knew I should have reached for the binoculars, but my limbs felt shackled by an irrational fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away, though my brain screamed at me to look away, to hide. Her presence was silent, yet fiercely commanding. She didn't move, just watched, or rather gave the impression of watching, her face shrouded in darkness. I don't know how long we remained locked in that bizarre standoff. It could have been minutes, but it felt like hours. I blinked, and she was gone, absorbed back into the trees as if she'd never been there at all. I told myself it belonged to imagination, a trick of the mind. Yet the nights grew more restless. I felt her presence more acutely now, a phantom that haunted my waking hours. I stopped sleeping altogether, afraid of what dreams might spill into reality. Every creak of the tower was amplified in the quiet, each groan of the wood mirrored my fraying nerves. I started sensing her even inside, the hairs on my neck rising in anticipation of her phantom gaze. I scribbled useless notes, trying to sketch out her form from memory on scraps of paper that would later seem shamefully crude. Days rolled into one another, eaten away by a gnawing unease. I noticed small changes, objects subtly displaced from where I'd left them, the radio crackling to life in bursts of static, only to die back into silence. Once, I found the door unlocked, swinging slightly in the mountain breeze. This jolted me from my stupor because I knew I'd locked it, could swear on my life that I had. The realization that someone, might be coming inside while I slept, if I ever truly slept, chilled me to the core. The isolation, once my refuge, had turned into a thriving breeding ground for paranoia. The forest that had been an ally now felt like an adversary, its depths concealing secrets I dared not uncover. Each morning, the sun pried its way into the cabin, but all it revealed were the same four walls, unchanged and unmoving, while something unfathomable bubbled beneath the surface of normalcy. Then came the shrill, piercing cries during one particularly cold night. They cut through the silence, shattering it like glass underfoot. It sounded like a woman, screaming somewhere deep in the forest, a desperate, gut-wrenching call for help that curdled into silence as abruptly as it had started. I froze, listening intently for any hint of its source, but only the wind responded, slipping between the trees like an indifferent wraith. Something was unraveling here, some ancient thread that I, in my solitude and arrogance, had stumbled upon. The tower had become a periphery prison, a point too isolated for comfort, yet too steeped in its own isolation to allow escape. I found myself contemplating the forest's embrace, wondering if I stepped beyond the threshold, would the whispers cease, or would they follow me, growing louder with each step? In the chill hours before dawn, as shadow and shape began to intertwine, I realized I might already be lost, not in the forest, but within something far deeper and darker. Whatever I had once feared outside the tower now seemed like a shadow of a greater terror, one that had already seeped in through the cracks, slipped inside, taken residence within walls that were no longer mine alone. By the time the moon hung low like a suspender from the heavens, the solitude that once wrapped me like a comforting blanket felt more like a stranglehold. The Fire Lookout Tower, perched above the Wyoming wilderness, no longer offered the solace I once found so abundant. Now, it was a crucible, intensifying the weight of every shadow, whisper, and those unsettling glances from the forest's edge. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly even as I tried to dismiss the physical evidence of my anxiety. The logbook lay open on the desk, each page a testament to the mundane routine I'd followed rigorously since my arrival. Only now, the pages seemed to crawl with accusations, daring me to leave a mark of this madness. The radio sat silent, a neglected companion, its static not so much a sound, but a pulse that filled the room. I hesitated to reach for it, reluctant to let my voice betray the fear I couldn't hide. An uncanny quiet settled over the woods, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches or a distant owl. I kept the window open slightly, believing the fresh air might somehow keep the unease at bay. But each breeze that slipped through carried with it a whisper, a familiar voice that I swore I once knew, now warped by distance and despair. Through the corner of my eye, something flickered, a movement too fluid to be the wind. I turned my head sharply, scanning the tree line where shadows and substance played a cruel trick on my senses. There, at the forest's boundary, a shape stood resolute, not the vague apparition of my tired imagination, but a figure with form and presence. She wore a dress that looked pale under the moon's gaze, hair cascading in loose waves around her shoulders. I couldn't see her face, but the angle of her head suggested she watched me with an intensity that crossed the space between us. A chill seeped into my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. It whispered a warning that curled around my spine and left me both paralyzed and drawn. Fighting the instinct to retreat further into the tower, I instead found my feet moving on their own, carrying me towards the door. My heartbeat matched the thump of the wooden steps as I descended, each one a leap into an abyss where reason fought a losing battle against a whisper of truth. As I neared the base of the tower, the spectral figure remained motionless at the edge. A statue carved with a purpose I yearned to understand, yet feared to comprehend. The underbrush crackled beneath my boots, a fragile sound swallowed by the vastness surrounding us. I stopped a stone's throw away, my voice tangled in thoughts of sanity and survival. "Who are you?" I called out, the words fractured with an urgency I couldn't contain. In response, the figure began to move, not towards me, but along the forest's edge. Her steps were deliberate, as though tracing an invisible line between my world and something altogether different. She paused at intervals, looking back at me, her face hidden in shadow, but imbued with a beckoning that tugged at my resolve. Compelled beyond logic, I followed as she led me deeper into the embrace of the trees. The path was one I had never taken, an unmarked passage that wound through the forest like a secret thread. My flashlight sliced through the dark, revealing glimpses of unfamiliar terrain, a twisted trunk, and owl's wide eyes glaring back at me, a rusted sign whose letters had long since bled into oblivion. The journey felt timeless, a suspended moment where my concern for where I was headed dissolved. All that mattered was the pursuit, the chase of answers that hovered just out of reach. Gradually, the forest opened into a clearing, quiet and still as a held breath. At its center, she stood waiting near a withered tree, its branches reaching out like arms pleading for understanding. Before her, the ground had fallen away into a shallow depression, its borders lined with stones etched with cryptic marks and words that seemed almost familiar. I knelt at its edge, tracing a finger along the markings, a prayer for recognition that refused to be answered. She watched me, saying nothing. Her silence was a cloak that wrapped tightly around us both, draining the air of expectation. The sense of being at the heart of something profound, something terrifyingly eternal, enveloped me. Here, in this consecrated silence, I knew I stood on the precipice not just of the land, but of an understanding that shattered the neat lines I'd drawn around reality. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked, my voice barely a rasp against the backdrop of growing night. The answer came not from her lips, but from the ground itself, shifting beneath me like the breath of a sleeping giant. In the earth's murmurs, I heard it, a name, a memory, a keening lament that resonated through marrow and bone. And with it came the realization, she hadn't brought me here, I had brought myself. For this moment had been waiting long before my feet found these woods, before my mind danced with shadows and suspicion. This was a place where the past held sway, where the choices of ancestors echo into the present, shaped by the unseen and often unnamed. The realization settled over me with the weight of inevitability, a web that bound me to this place, to this woman, and to the unknown forces that coursed like veins through the world beneath my feet. I looked up at her then, and in her eyes reflected the stars, those ancient watchers of our deeds. Understanding unfurled within me, a quiet horror as gentle as it was encompassing. She was not a ghost of the past, but a sentinel of the present, a reminder of paths walked and the ones yet to be tread. The invitation wasn't to follow, but to remember, to embrace the threads of forebears and the future they shape. As the dawn broke, bleeding light over the horizon, she vanished as if swallowed by the waking world, leaving behind only the clearing and its silent promise. I stood there, rooted and transformed by the encounter, aware now of the legacy that whispered on the wind. The tower awaited my return, yet the man who climbed its steps was not the one who had descended. My eyes, though weary, saw with clarity, and within that clarity lay the quiet terror of understanding. Behind me, the forest closed like the pages of a book, its story unfinished yet everlasting, its echoes lingering long after the path had disappeared. I looked once more toward the horizon, where sun-kissed shadows danced across the land, a promise of questions never fully answered, and the haunting knowledge of all that thrived in the spaces between.